We always hear about the masterpiece, the Concorde, but did you know that a Soviet one, named as Konkordski, was built before the French Concorde? In today's video, we'll speak about the Concorde, but the Soviet one. In the 1950s and 1960s, all countries and nations were racing to manufacture anything to be labeled as the first, whether it was building a unique plane or sending a rocket into space. This is where the history of the Concorde started, when nations were competing to build a supersonic and it became a matter of national pride. While the Europeans were busy working on the Concorde, which they assumed would be the first supersonic airliner, the Soviets had another plan. They were ready to launch their supersonic, which was given the name Konkordski, as it was resembling the Anglo-French Concorde. Tupolev 144 did beat the Concorde to the skies twice. It took its maiden flight on December 31, 1968. It was 2 months prior to when Concorde took its flight. It also took the first supersonic flight in June of 1969, which was 4 months before Concorde. This achievement was great. The Soviet industry at that time was a little behind US and Europe, so achieving this was a big deal for the Russians. Both aircraft were very similar but yet different. Tupolev could carry up to 150 passengers compared to Concorde, which could only carry 120. Tupolev 144 was also much faster than Concorde. It could achieve a speed of up to 1,600 miles per hour, and Concorde's max was 1,354 miles per hour. Tupolev was a little faster and bigger than Concorde, but what stood out was its canards behind the cockpit. This created an extra lift and was doing better at low speeds. In 1973, the biggest and most awaiting event in aviation industry took place, where the Konkordski and Concorde both were participants. Concorde was first. It completed its show without any hustle. However, when it was Konkordski's time, their show was much bolder, with Tupolev doing much more twists and turns. Unfortunately, the show turned into a fatal crash, where it crashed into a village while it was presenting on the show, killing all 6 crew members on board, along with 8 individuals on the ground. A little after the crash, a conspiracy came out stating that Tupolev's main reason for crashing was because it was avoiding the French Mirage fight, who was trying to photograph it. But later, those rumors were put down in a statement which said, the Mirage had nothing to do with that crash. It was just speculation to divert attention from the real cause, which was drastic maneuvering of the Tupolev 144 that exceeded allowable stress limits. After the crash, footages were released. It showed that Tupolev was going into a nosedive in order to reignite the engines after it flamed out. Tupolev also underwent a lot of pressure, which resulted in the wings breaking off. A lot of experts later stated that the pilots were attempting to impress the public and the press to show that the Soviets can build better planes than the West. After the crash, nothing was the same for Tupolev 144. It never recovered. The crash in Paris delayed the program of the plane by 4 years. This delay allowed Concorde to enter the service first. Soviets were finding it difficult to accept it. After all, their goal was always to be first and overcome the West. They always rushed with projects in order to be the first. Years after, Tupolev 144 entered service and started flying passengers in 1977. Konkordski turned out to be a very cramped aircraft. It was extremely noisy and was said to be prone to breakage. It could only sustain its supersonic speed using afterburners, just like military aircraft. A lot of times it was mentioned that someone with sensitive ears cannot fly on it, as it's very loud. Aeroflot used Tupolev 144 to serve in a 2-hour route between Moscow, Almaty, and the capital of Kazakhstan, but the weekly flights were almost empty. The plane ended up transporting more mail and cargo than people. The service was canceled after just 6 months. A little before its retirement, another fatal crash took place on May of 1978, when the plane caught fire and landed in an emergency landing, killing 2 flight engineers. This crash banned Tupolev 144 from carrying passengers. In its short serving time of just 55 return flights, Konkordski suffered a lot of failures, which many of them was in-flight, starting from depressurization, alarms that couldn't be switched off, and engine failures. A lot of stories came up after, of passengers needing to communicate on paper. Ginberg, an aviation engineer, later stated that the country was not ready to deploy planes like this. It had teething problems, it was not economical, and ultimately there was no real need for high-speed passenger transportation. The plane was retired quietly, and the production for any new one was stopped. The program was completely stopped in 1984. Overall, just 17 Tupolev 144s were ever produced. After retirement, a lot of them were scrapped, but few were taken for display in museums in Germany and Russia. However, their very last flight happened in 1999, which was sponsored by NASA. It was a 3-year US-Russian research program on supersonic flights. The aircraft used in the programs was the last Konkordski ever created. It logged out with just 82 flight hours. The program later was stopped due to insufficient funds. Konkordski could have had a successful future, and it could have been labeled as an aviation miracle if the Soviets took their time to manufacture it, rather speeding the process to be first. This is the end of today's video. Do you think that Tupolev 144 could have been a success? Share with us in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn the post notifications on to receive the latest from us. See you in the next one.